the Exodus, the Yetzias Mitzrayim, was an opportunity for God to show that He is involved in the running of the world. And He does this in the most dazzling way. You have 10 fantastic plagues. The miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea, which is unbelievable. Whenever I think of the splitting of the Red Sea, I'm just reminded, I should mention it, it's just funny, that I slept through the splitting of the Red Sea. How so? I lived in California. And in California, on the Universal Studios tour, they show you how they split the Red Sea for the 10 Commandments. And whenever anyone came to visit, it became obligatory. I had to take them on the Universal Studios tour. I saw it so many times. I was so bored. So one time, my parents came to visit. I took them on the tour, and I was so bored, I literally fell asleep in the tram. And my parents told me afterward, "You slept through the splitting of the Red Sea." But I can assure you that the first time around, no one slept through it. It was dazzling. And that's how God showed His power. The Ramban writes that these miracles are really the confirmation of our most fundamental beliefs about God. We believe that God, of course, exists. We believe that He is omniscient, He is all-knowing. We believe He is omnipotent, He's all-powerful. And these miracles demonstrate that. There's only the God who is the creator of all things could perform such wonderful miracles. The fact that He performed them at the right place, at the right time, just as they were needed, shows His omniscience. Certainly the strength of the miracle shows His omnipotence. So these miracles confirm our beliefs about God. And then the Ramban, in a classic piece, says, and from the Nisim Hamofursamim, from the great public spectacles, these fantastic miracles, a person must come to believe in the Nisim HaNistarim, in the hidden miracles. Because, says the Ramban, a person does not have a share in the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu unless he believes that everything that occurs to us is in fact a function of divine decree. There is nothing which happens merely because the laws of nature dictate that it happened. Everything that happens is a function of divine decree and divine providence. But that's a tremendous leap of faith. That's a tremendous leap of faith. Because miracles, by their very nature, appear to be exceptions to the rule. In other words, when you experience this dazzling miracle, you can easily sit back and say it like this: as a rule, the world runs on its own steam. God set the laws of nature into motion, and things unfold in accordance with those natural rules. On occasion, from time to time, when God sees that things aren't going to work out, if He leaves them up to the natural way, God will intervene and perform this dazzling miracle. But otherwise, He withdraws, sits back, and lets things run their natural course. So a miracle, really, a dazzling miracle, a dazzling public miracle, lends itself to a potential error. That one may assume that the miracle is an exception and not the rule. So the Ramban tells us that we shouldn't make that mistake. We have to make that leap, that inductive leap, if you will, from the public miracles to the hidden miracles. Now, it could be that once upon a time, this was a leap that people were able to make with their own understanding. But I think we can make a very strong argument that that really is what the Yom Tovim of Chanukah and Purim are all about. The holidays of Chanukah and Purim enable us to make that leap. In two different ways. Now, the Maharal points out about Chanukah, a very interesting thing, that Chanukah, there were two miracles. There was the miracle of the military victory against the Syrian Greeks, which was totally natural. In other words, there was nothing supernatural, no dazzling plagues. It was just a military victory. It's true that it was an unlikely victory. The many were handed into the hands of the few. The strong were given over into the hands of the weak. But it certainly wasn't something supernatural. But the person looking at it could convince himself that it was just superior strategy. Maybe the Jews had the home field advantage, so to speak. They were fighting on their territory. They certainly had greater motivation. Remember, the Syrian Greeks, these were mercenary armies that had no vested interest in the battle. So therefore, it could be interpreted as being a natural victory. But accompanying the miracle of the war was the miracle of the menorah, which was most certainly a supernatural miracle. That oil that really should have lasted one day lasted for 8 days. So Maharal explains that by coupling the two miracles, God showed that just like the one is undoubtedly a function of divine decree, don't make a mistake, the other is also a function of divine decree. So what God did was, He gave us a tap on the shoulder and a reminder. Don't make a mistake. Don't think that the war is just something which happened. The war is associated with the miracle of the menorah, that we should understand that even the war was a function of divine decree. So this is a strategy. The whole Hanukkah story is a strategy of a way of coming to understand that even when God's presence and involvement is not apparent, God is really running the show. Purim is really the same thing in another way. Because Purim is really just the outlandish nature of the coincidences that unfold lead us to believe that God undoubtedly is running things. So it facilitates a leap of faith. Whereas no one who reads the Megillah walks away with a feeling or an impression that this is a natural occurrence. As everyone who reads the Megillah says, this is unlikely, this is too preposterous. It must be that God is pulling the strings all along. And that's what Purim is all about. So Hanukkah and Purim really are taking us that step further, that step beyond. That miracles are not the exception, but God's involvement really is the rule. And I'd like to say more than that, that you really have to go through these stages. Because you cannot come to the understanding of Hanukkah and Purim until you've gone through the experience of Pesach. In other words, first you have to learn about God. And we learn about God from those public displays of God's omniscience and omnipotence. Once we've mastered that, then we can take it a step further on Hanukkah and Purim, and that completes the cycle of the year. And it's important to know that you can't go to university until you finish high school, right? You can't go to high school until you finish elementary school. You can't go to elementary school until you finish preschool. First things first. Pesach is like Aleph Beis. Pesach is the basics. That's the beginning. We've mastered lessons of Pesach, then we can tackle the more subtle lessons of Hanukkah and Purim. But it really points to two different ways in which God runs the world. Sometimes God runs the world by performing acts which are, in a sense, exceptions to the rule. There is nature. Nature follows its course. And there are divine interventions in nature. Those are the great public miracles. But there's something which is more subtle, which is that nature itself is constructed in such a way as to advance the divine plan. Not so much an intervention, but that is the spirit which underlies nature itself. So when God created the world, there is a pattern that nature unfolds in order to advance the divine plan. Just to give a muscle, an illustration. Now this itself is a matter of dispute among evolutionary biologists, but biologists speak of evolution. The question is evolution a random process which may have many dead ends, but in certain instances may have resulted in the production of an improved species? Or is evolution a directed process? Meaning that it's a process which is put into place in order to bring about the ultimate perfection of a human being who can recognize where he came from. Well, this is a matter of debate. I think that there are evolutionists of a religious bent who wish to say that evolution is a directed process. I think the evolutionists of a more atheistic bent like to think of it as a non-directed process. But just as by way of illustration, nature, according to the Ramban, is not just a process which unfolds without discrimination. In other words, it is God's tool. Nature itself is set up in such a way that it should strive towards the fulfillment of the divine plan. And therefore, there are things that happen to advance God's plan. No dazzling miracles, no plagues, no splitting of the Red Sea, and yet nature unfolding results in what God wants to bring about. In the beginning of the 40 years, the Jews were on the first level. The first level, they first had to learn about God. They had to learn that there is a nature, and God overpowers nature. So a very, very powerful demonstration of that is, imagine a rock, a dry, hard rock. And all of a sudden, Moshe Rabbeinu hits it with the staff. And you know Moshe Rabbeinu's staff had God's name carved on it, and he hits that rock with the staff, and all of a sudden this hard rock gushes water. That's a pretty powerful demonstration of divine intervention. That's exactly what the Jews needed to learn in the beginning of the 40 years. But now it's 40 years later. By now the Jews should have completed elementary school. They should have completed high school, university. Now they're on their graduate degree. What is it that the Jews need to hear at this point? The Jews need to hear at this point something else, which is that nature itself is designed to advance the divine plan. At this point, you don't have to overpower the nature of the rock. You don't have to hit the rock. At this point, all you have to do is ask the rock, and the rock will give you what is really there all along. So Moshe Rabbeinu, instead of talking to the rock and saying, rock, please give forth the water that really is in you, he hits the rock, which is a demonstration of not God working through nature, but God overpowering nature. 40 years ago, that was a very important lesson, but not now. Right? As we explained, that Shana means ascent. In a way we come around, but we always come around at a higher level. Because we can't come back year after year after year to the same place. We have to come back year after year after year to a higher place. The Jews 40 years later have to learn a higher lesson. And if Moshe Rabbeinu fails to teach them this higher lesson, that is a lost opportunity. And God calls him to task for that. He says, you failed. He says, you could have sanctified my name in a totally transcendent way. You could have demonstrated that not only do I intervene in nature, but to the contrary, I created a natural world which itself strives to fulfill my will, and you didn't do that. You showed them something they should have mastered 40 years ago. That is a failure of your leadership, and for that you lose the right to go into Eretz Yisrael.
Why is talking to a rock to extract water that's already there a demonstration of something that's not very dazzling?
Because it's not changing the rock to water. The water is there. Just, could you pass the water, please? In other words, it's different. In other words, when you hit a rock, you're saying like this. The nature of this rock is a dry, hard rock. But there is a superior force which can overwhelm the rock, overpower the rock. You hit the rock, it turns to water. Okay, that's symbolic of a divine intervention in nature. But if you talk to a rock, what are you really saying? The water's there all along. The water's there. Just pass the water. Right? It looks like a rock, but in every rock there's water. I mean, the nature itself is that there's a solution to the problem. That's a much higher level. That's the level that within nature there is a drive to fulfill the divine plan. That's something which is beyond. And it's a very sad thing that the Jews didn't learn it then. How long did they have to wait to learn it? 1,000 years, till the Purim story. Or it could be that if Moshe Rabbeinu would not have hit the rock, if he would have talked to the rock, there wouldn't have been a Purim story, which, by the way, would have been the case anyway. Because as the Sfarim tell us, if Moshe Rabbeinu would have led the Jews into Eretz Yisrael, there would be no exile. And if there would be no exile, then all the history which takes place in exile wouldn't have occurred. So you say, so what would have happened to Purim? Whatever we needed to learn from Purim, where we learned it, the whole Purim story took place in Galus. The answer is, if Moshe Rabbeinu would have talked to the rock, that would have been Purim. In other words, whatever we ultimately learned from Purim, we would have learned from Moshe Rabbeinu talking to the rock. But if Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock instead, so we didn't learn the lesson of Purim, so we had to learn it at the real Purim 1,000 years later. So history unfolds a different way. So ultimately we accomplish what we're meant to accomplish, but it takes a lot longer. But Purim is therefore the culmination of Pesach. Purim is the yontif that gives us the ability to see beyond the idea of a miracle merely being a divine intervention, to understanding that there's a force which is embedded in nature, which strives to the fulfillment of the divine plan. But it's a process. First, we have to tackle the basics, our basic beliefs about God, God's omnipotence, God's omniscience, and then we talk about the subtleties of how God works within nature. So therefore, once Purim is completed, we begin the cycle all over again. We come back to Pesach. And Pesach really, when you think about it, Pesach is back to basics. Pesach is back to basics. Pesach is our opportunity to tackle the most fundamental aspects of our Jewish belief. That's what Pesach is all about. And then we build on that foundation the entire year. And we all know that. We all, you know, there's an idea on Pesach of speaking to our children. V'higarat lebincha, speak to your children. But it's a very interesting thing that the Talmud tells us that what if a person has no children? Let's say a person is making the Seder alone. So what should he do? So the Gemara says he should ask himself the questions. So what's the point of asking yourself the questions? I mean, the children are supposed to ask the questions. You teach the children, we're going to ask yourself the questions. The answer is that you're also a child. Everyone is a child of the Seder. We're also children. As our children are certainly children, we're also children. As we're going back to basics. As we're teaching ourselves the things that we need to learn as children. If there are actual children, we speak to the actual children. If there aren't actual children, we'll play the role of children. But we all feel that way. We all feel at the Seder that we are getting back to our roots, our beginnings. We're starting anew. We're taking nothing for granted. We're laying the foundation for everything we're going to come to understand and learn about for the coming year. That's what Pesach is. That's what the Seder is all about. And the truth is, we all, those of us who have the privilege of being raised in homes where the Seder was conducted, we all have this tremendous nostalgia for the Seder, for our own youth, what it was like to be a child. And there's a certain magical quality of the Seder, I think, which is, it's hard to define, but it's easy to feel. That I think we all do feel like that. We all feel that this is back to our youth and the special charm that the Seder has. But that's what Pesach is. Pesach is back to basics. Over the year, we build on that foundation. Purim is the pinnacle, because Purim is really the culmination. It's the final installment in all the lessons that we apply to Pesach. And when Purim is completed, we're ready to begin the cycle anew. Yes?
Why do you suppose then that God didn't include Purim and Hanukkah in the
You see, that's the idea, that if you could derive it from Pesach, Shavuos and Sukkot alone, you wouldn't need Hanukkah and Purim. As Hanukkah and Purim is what the Rabbi said, that apparently we're not learning our lessons, so therefore we need a Hanukkah and Purim too. But the rabbis always help us out, right? They give us what we need, right? Not what we must have needed, but what we ended up needing. There was the Yom Tovim D'Rabbanan, obviously, and this has nothing to do with this conception, however you understand it. The lessons of the Yom Tovim D'Rabbanan obviously are lessons that we could have learned without them, but they are easier to learn with them. So the rabbi said it's appropriate to have these holidays because they're going to facilitate, they're going to enable us to learn the lessons that otherwise we'd have a hard time learning. So it's not that Hanukkah and Purim teach us lessons that are not implicit in Torah, right? They teach us lessons that are implicit in Torah, but they make it easier because they give us the opportunity to discuss and to integrate these ideas. Question?
How long after the story that you've just given us, how many years later did it take rabbis in hindsight to put that story together about the rock and the water? I mean, it didn't, Moshe Rabbeinu never said, I've made this mistake, and...
The Chumash tells the story. The Chumash says that God calls Moshe Rabbeinu to task for having done it the wrong way the second time around. So the story is there in the Chumash. And there are many interpretations of the story. This is one of those parshias which there are a range of interpretations. This is only one of them. But the story itself is in the Chumash. The story itself is there. So it's from the very beginning. Okay, everyone. So everyone have a great Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And actually, I think we'll meet before Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is what day?
On Thursday.
On Thursday, next week. So we'll have a class before Rosh Chodesh. Everyone have a great Parshas HaChodesh. And we'll meet next week. Thank you for your patience.